Hey, what is going on everyone? In the last video, what we did was set up our 3 activities. So if we click the play button on our home screen, it'll take us over to the enter your names activity, and then we can submit the names that we enter within our 2 text boxes here. So once we submit our names, they should be transferred over to our final activity, the one where the users are actually going to play tic-tac-toe. Now in this video, what I'd like to do is actually create our tic-tac-toe view and then place it within the center of our final activity. So let's get started. All right, so we want to place a tic-tac-toe board onto our third activity, but the question is, how do we get it there? Now, usually we'd come over to our activities XML file, so in our case it would be the game display.xml file, and then we'd come over to our palette, and then within our palette we would just find the view that we wanted and drag it in. But if you look all throughout our palette, there is no tic-tac-toe board. So we're going to have to create our own from scratch. So to do this, we're going to go over to the far left panel and then expand every folder within our Java file. And then the very last folder, we're going to right click on this, hover over new, and then we're going to create a new Java class. And then I'm going to call this Java class tic-tac-toe board, hit enter, and then we're going to leave all these fields blank and then hit OK. And then what should happen is a new file called tic-tac-toe-board.java should appear and a new class should be written in there for you. Now, the first thing we're going to have to do is extend the view class. So I'm going to type in extends view, then we're going to have to create a constructor. So we have this error message here. So if we hover over this, Android Studio can actually create the constructor for us. And we want this option right here, the context and the adders. So click OK, and then all this code should be filled in for you. Okay, so now this is great and all. We didn't have to type out any of this code, but there's one issue. We don't have an adders.xml file. So if we come over to the far left panel, we can actually create this file. So if we come over to our resources folder, expand that, come down to values, and then right click on that folder, hover over new, and then we're going to create a new values resource file. So click that and we're going to call it adders and then click OK. And then the new adders resource file should appear. And then within these tags, we're going to declare a new styleable. So we're going to type in declare styleable, and then we're going to call it tic-tac-toe board. So Android Studio already noticed that we're creating a new view. So make sure this name matches the name of your class. So within our declare styleable tags, we're going to define all the attributes that will be associated to our tic-tac-toe board. But what is an attribute? These are things like the text color, whether or not the text is bold, and like the font size. So in our case, we can define a board color by typing in adders, so the adders tag, we're going to call it board color, and then we have to give it a format of color. Then we can close this tag off and we define our first attribute for our tic-tac-toe board. Now there's 3 more attributes that I'd like to define. I'm going to go ahead and just type those. So now that we have all the attributes defined for our tic-tac-toe board, we need to find a way to grab the values from the XML file and bring them over into our Java code. So how do we do that? If we come over to our tic-tac-toe board.java file within our constructor, the way I like doing this is by creating a typed array. I like calling it A, setting that equal to context.getTheme.obtain styled attributes. And then within here, we're just going to pass in our adders file, comma, r.styleable.tic-tac-toe board. So this one all the way down here. Then we have to pass in 2 default values, and I usually make these 0. So 0 and 0. I'm going to enter this over so you guys can see this. So this is what I have typed within the obtain styled attributes, the adders file, along with our styleable, and then 2 default values. Then after this, we can actually extract those values obtained and assign them to a variable in our Java code. So let's come just outside of our onCreate, and then we can define 4 new variables within our Java code to store the values we extract from our typed array. So we're going to go private, and I'm just going to give them a name of whatever we have in here. So the first one I'm going to call board color. So private final int board color, and then we're going to have another private final int, and then I think we called it X color. We had an O color, so I'm going to copy this line, and then we had our winning line color. So these variables right here are going to store the values that we extract out of our typed array. So to extract our values, we can use a try block. So try, and then we'll have a finally at the end of this, and we're going to do an a.recycle in here. But within our try block, what we're going to do is type in board color, set that equal to a.getInteger r.styleable.tic-tac-toe board color. So this very first option that's displayed right here, it's tic-tac-toe board underscore whatever you name that attribute. So in my case, it was board color. I'm going to hit enter. That'll fill that in for me. And again, it wants another default value, and I'm just going to give it a value of 0. So comma 0. And then I'm going to do the same thing for all of our other variables. So I'll be back. All right, so now we have every single attribute that could ever be assigned to our tic-tac-toe board stored in some variable within our Java code. Now what I like to do is actually define the dimensions of our tic-tac-toe board. So to do this, we could come just outside of our onCreate method. Let's come below it, and we have to override the onMeasure method. So we could type in @override, come just below this, and type in protected void onMeasure, and then within here, we're going to take in a width along with a height. Close this off, and then within our onMeasure method, we're going to actually set up the dimensions of our tic-tac-toe board. But before we actually do that, we have to type in super.onMeasure and then pass in our width along with our height. Then what I'd like to do after the super call is actually define the dimensions of our board by some calculation. So we can type in int dimensions, set that equal to. Now, here's where I want to actually calculate the dimensions. I would like this app to be able to run on many devices, and I want our tic-tac-toe board to be a perfect square. So what we have to do is find the smallest dimension of the user's screen size. So what do I mean by that? We need to grab either the width or height and figure out which one is smaller, and then we can set that to our dimension of our tic-tac-toe board. So this will probably make a little bit more sense once you see it. So we could type in math.min, and then we need to get the measured width, and then we need to get the measured height. So this is going to return the width of the user's screen, and this is going to return the height of the user screen. Now I'm about 99% sure that it's always going to be the width of the user screen that's the smallest, but just on the off chance that it does happen to be the height, I want to make sure that we actually grab that smaller value and set that to our dimension. Then what we can do just past this is type in set measured dimension to dimension, comma, dimensions. And this is what's actually defining the dimensions of our view. So we're going to extract the smallest value, whether it's the width or height, and then set that value to the dimensions of our view. So it'll be a perfect square and it'll fit perfectly on the user screen. All right, so now that we have the dimension of our tic-tac-toe board set up, what we got to do now is actually write some code to actually draw our tic-tac-toe board. So to do this, we're going to need to create two methods and create a paint object. So to start off, let's just create this paint object because it's going to be the easiest. Come up just below where we defined our variables that store our attribute values. We'll come below this, type in private final, and then we're going to create a new paint object. So we're going to use the paint class. I'm going to call it paint and set that equal to a new paint. So we'll end this statement, come down just past our onMeasure method, and we're going to create those two methods I was talking about. The first one is the onDraw. Now we're going to have to override this, so type in @override, come past this override statement, and we can type in protected void, and then onDraw. And this onDraw method is going to take in a canvas, which is the area of our view, and then we'll just call it canvas. Close this off, and then within here, what I want to do is set up that paint object that we just created. So we can type in paint.setStyle, and then we're going to go paint.style, and then we're going to give it a style of stroke. So this is going to draw in lines for us. And then past this, we're going to type in paint.setAntiAlias, so this one right here, and pass in true. And then just below this, when our onDraw is called, what I'd like to do is call a method that'll actually draw our tic-tac-toe board. Now, unfortunately, Android Studio doesn't have one of these built in, so we're going to have to write our own. And I'd like to call it draw game board, and this is going to take in a canvas. So we have to create this method here. So let's come past our onDraw method and actually create it. So we'll type in private void and then draw game board. And remember, it's going to take in a canvas. So canvas, call it canvas. And then within here, we're going to have to write some code to actually draw those lines that make up the tic-tac-toe board. But before we go ahead and write that code, what we need to know is the cell size. Those are those squares that the user actually clicks on to place in their marker. We need to know the size of that so we know where to draw in our lines. So if we come back up to the onMeasure, and then coming past what our dimensions variable is, what we can do is type in cell size, and we haven't defined this yet. Set that equal to whatever our dimension variable is, and divide that by 3 because we have 3 boxes in each row and column. And before we move on, I got to change the name of this variable. I don't know why I made it plural, so I'm going to change it from dimensions to dimension. Okay, so this line of code right here is going to calculate what our cell size is, but we haven't defined this variable. So let's go above and actually define it. So we can come past our paint and type in private int. We'll call it cell size, and then we'll just define it as a value of get width divided by 3. So this will be its default value, but remember the width might not be the smallest dimension on the user's screen, so our on measure could theoretically override that. Okay, so now that we have a cell size, we can come down to our draw game board and actually start writing the code that's going to draw on the 4 lines that make up our tic-tac-toe board. So to do this, we're going to utilize 2 for loops. So I'm going to go for int c equals 1 while c is less than 3, and then we'll do a c++. Close this for loop off, and I'm going to copy it and then come just past it and change the c's to an r. So then within our first for loop, what we can do is type in canvas.drawLine. And within here, we have to pass in 5 arguments: the starting position for our x and y, the end position for our x and y, along with the paint object. So we could type in cell size times whatever our c value is, comma 0. So this is the starting position of our first line. And then we have to pass in that end position, cell size times c again. And then finally, we could pass in a canvas.getWidth. Now you could use get height too, because it should be a square, whichever one you want to use. And then we're going to pass in our paint. So now this should draw our columns. So if we copy and paste this line, we could paste it into the second for loop to draw in our rows. So then we have to change a few things around. We could flop these two. So our starting x should be a value of 0, but our starting y should be our cell size times whatever our r value is. And then our canvas.width should be moved over to here. So I'll paste it to our starting x, and we'll change the starting y to our cell size times whatever our r value is. So this is great, but we need to do one more thing. We need to set a color to our paint object. So we can type in paint.setColor, and then we're just going to pass in whatever our board color happens to be, the value we extracted from our XML file. Then just past this, we're going to define a width for our stroke. So paint.setStrokeWidth, and I'm going to give it a value of 16. All right, so now that we have this method done, what we can do now is actually place this tic-tac-toe board into our GameDisplay.xml file. But before we do that, what we need to do is rebuild our project. Now, what this is going to do is kind of let Android Studio know that, hey, there's a new view here that we could work with. So come up to Build and then click Rebuild Project, and then that should rebuild our project. And then if we come back over to the GameDisplay.xml file, in our palette, what you should have now is a new section within our palette, the project section. If you click this, you can see that we have a tic-tac-toe board view within here. We can click this and drag it out onto our board just like any other view, and you can see we have a perfect square because it grabbed the width of whatever emulator I happen to be using. I think it's the Pixel 2, and it defined that as the dimensions for our tic-tac-toe board. And what's cool about this is that it also has those little bubbles on each of our side to add constraints. So what I'm going to do is grab this far left bubble and add constraints to the left and right, top and bottom, and then this should be placed within the center of our display. So this is our tic-tac-toe board, but it's blank right now because we haven't defined any of those attributes. It doesn't know what our board color is. So if we come over to the far right, we can click the split button and actually write in our attributes within our XML code. So we can scroll down and you're looking for this tag here. What this tag is, if you come over to the far left, it's just the path to the class that's defining our view. So before we go ahead and actually define what our board color is, we need to place in one thing so we can actually assign values to our custom attributes. So if we come all the way up to the top, within this constraint layout tag, what we need to do is add in one thing. I'm going to come just below our tools and then paste in this line right here. All you got to do is just copy this in, and it's going to allow us to use the custom attributes that we defined for our tic-tac-toe board. So once you have that in your constraint layout, come all the way back down to where we have our tic-tac-toe tag, and we can actually define a value for our board color by typing in custom : board color. Now this has to match whatever name you defined in your attribute tag right here. So I usually like coming in here, copying this, and then pasting it in here just in case I have a typo, and then setting that equal to whatever color you want the tic-tac-toe board to be. So I'm going to start off by defining it as black. And if we come over to our design, you could see we have a tic-tac-toe board. Now, the cool thing about this is you can make it whatever color you want. I can give it a value of green. We can give it a value of, let's try blue. And we can give it a value of red. It's pretty sweet. You can make it whatever color you want, totally up to you. But now we have our tic-tac-toe board on our final activity. So I think it would be cool if we actually ran the emulator. So if we come up to the top right, we can click that play button. And then we're presented with our home screen. Click the play button. I'm not going to fill out any of these. You hit the submit button. Now we have our tic-tac-toe board on our final activity. So I think this is a great spot to end this video now that we have our tic-tac-toe board on the final activity. Now in the next video, what I'd like to do is make our tic-tac-toe board interactable. So if I were to click this square here, I want either an X or an O to be placed within there. And we're going to actually have to create those methods that can draw the X's and O's. As always, if you guys have any questions or if you're having trouble getting something to work, leave a comment down below. I'd be more than happy to help you guys out. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.